Yeah, that tracks. Well, this has been a pretty exciting few months, hasn't it? Leading up to the release of Sonic X Shadow Generations, to me, has felt like Christmas morning, if Santa had taken a fat poop into your stocking for the past, 8 years. But regardless, now that it's here, is it any good? Now, as much as I'm eager to discuss the game at hand as soon as possible, I do want to rewind a few years to around 2010. What do you mean that was almost 15 years ago? 2010 at first seemed to mark the beginning of a Sonic renaissance. After Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1 and Sonic Colors both reviewed positively, the future was looking bright for the Blue Hedgehog for the first time in a very long time. Now, going back to them, Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Episode 1 really isn't that great of a game. I don't think it's as terrible as a lot of people make it out to be, but it definitely aged like milk compared to some of the other entries in this franchise. Sonic Colors I still think is a fantastic game, and I recommend it to anyone that typically enjoys platformers. Especially if you enjoy 2D platformers. Yeah, I don't think Sonic Colors exactly had the budget of a mainline Mario game here, and what I mean by that is that the majority of Sonic Colors is in 2D. While the gameplay itself has certainly taken a lot of inspiration from 2008's Sonic Unleashed, specifically the daytime stages, there is a bit of an overemphasis on 2D platforming here. It doesn't feel bad, but it's kinda jarring. Then 1 year later, in 2011, Sonic Generations came out, and while I'm not sure that it sold amazingly at first, I think this re-release actually sold a little better, Sonic fans on Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and the computer finally had something to chew on. A well-designed modern Sonic game with classic Sonic elements that hold up tremendously well to this day. My only 3 complaints with the original release of Sonic Generations was the lackluster performance on then-generation consoles, the final modern Sonic stage, and the final boss. Does the re-release do anything to correct these issues? No, not really, but it does a lot to make up for them. After Sonic Generations release, 2 full years later, we got the next entry in the franchise, Sonic Lost World. Now, on paper, Sonic Lost World sounded like a fantastic idea. Similar to Mario 3D World, it combines a lot of 2D classic Sonic elements into a 3D playfield, and it feels a bit like Sonic Adventure. And Sonic Lost World definitely had some pretty good ideas. And a whole lot of terrible ones. Yeah, I don't think I'm saying anything too brave or controversial here, but Sonic Lost World kinda sucks. Now, this game isn't a complete loss. There are a couple genuinely good levels in this game that I do enjoy going back to on rare occasions. Honeycomb Highway is a really fun auto run level that reminds me a lot of the Mach Speed sections of Sonic 06, but this time it's actually fucking playable. I also really like the rail grinding level in Tropical Coast. It emphasizes a bit of a risk versus reward scenario where some of the easier rails won't have as good of treasure as some of the harder rails to take, so you have to plan it out and jump at the right time. It's pretty fun, and the music is phenomenal. Desert Ruins, on top of being a pretty clever pun, is also a really fun level with candy and cookie motifs. I really wish Shadow Generations brought back this level because it would be hilarious to see Shadow the Hedgehog of all characters running around a giant dessert paradise. But of course the 2 best levels in the game were the Legend of Zelda and Yoshi Zones, which were exclusive to the Wii U version, obviously. Now, the Yoshi Zone is a pretty typical Yoshi's Island style 2D level. It's one of the better 2D levels in Sonic Lost World, and is always fun to go back to. But the Legend of Zelda Zone, this is very much a prototype for Sonic Frontiers, if you ask me. A pseudo-open world with different mission objectives to accomplish. This is a really fun level, and it sucks that it's exclusive to the console that nobody owns. But for every fantastic level like that, there's levels like Tropical Coast Act 4, where you have to roll giant fruit around, or Frozen Factory Act 2, where you have to play as a snowball and it controls like shit, or Lava Mountain Zone 1, where the stage can just randomly disappear from under your feet. Hey, thanks assholes, great level design. Or Frozen Factory Act 3 with the casino pinball minigame. I hear way too many people giving the Sonic Frontiers pinball minigame shit. This controls far worse, and unlike Sonic Frontiers, you can't take your time with this one. It's an integral part of the level, and you have to rush through it in order to get a good score on time attack. Yeah, so Sonic Lost World is kind of all over the place, and to me, it's always felt like a Sonic game with an identity crisis. Did it want to be a modern game? Did it want to be a classic game? Did it want to be fucking Super Monkey Ball? I genuinely don't know, and playing this game just pisses me off nowadays. Not counting spin-offs, we had to wait an entire 4 years for the next mainline Sonic game. Sonic Forces is a game that I've already done a couple videos on in the past, but I consider them to be a bit outdated because my opinion has shifted slightly. Now, I do think this game is far better in design than Sonic Lost World, but as a game that sets itself up as a sequel to Sonic Generations, it underdelivers in almost every single way. We'll get the couple positives out of the way first. The avatar creator was ingenious. This fanbase has a ton of OCs. You can Google any name on Earth followed by the Hedgehog and find results for it, but I wouldn't recommend doing that on a work computer. Furthermore, the soundtrack, while I do think it's a little lacking at points, is still overall pretty good. And that's pretty much it for positives. Everything else is a legitimate step back from Sonic Generations. Sonic doesn't control super well in this game. His acceleration is way too high, yet he feels way too stiff, and moving him from side to side is basically impossible when you're boosting. He also doesn't have much of that whole momentum thing, which is ironic considering the fact that this franchise was literally born on momentum. The avatar is basically a clone of modern Sonic, but he can't boost, and the homing attack is far slower. I don't find these avatar stages to be particularly fun as a result. And then finally, there's classic Sonic. Why the fuck is he here? I get that this was meant to tie in with Sonic Mania, which also released in 2017 and was a far better game, but there's no reason for classic Sonic to be in Sonic Forces, and he controls terribly. His acceleration feels wicked slow, rolling doesn't feel particularly great, and you basically have to spam the drop dash or spin dash in order to get through his levels at a decent pace. While I appreciate the avatar from a gameplay customization standpoint, if it and classic Sonic straight up weren't in Sonic Forces, I legitimately think I would have enjoyed it more. Modern Sonic stages only last about a minute and a half at maximum, so if there was a way to rework the avatar and classic stages into modern stages, we might have had a legitimately good game here. Bite-sized levels, sure, but it would have felt more like Sonic Colors. But as it stands, it is a bitch to get through Sonic Forces. I don't want to play this avatar level. I don't want to sit through another classic Sonic stage, and I know damn well that my reward is a 1-minute long modern Sonic stage where he doesn't control particularly great. The biggest kick in the balls with Sonic Forces is that they were originally planning on making Super Sonic paid DLC. Now that should tell you everything you need to know about Sonic Forces. It legitimately feels like a passionless cash grab, much like a paid Super Sonic DLC. And to prove that, what followed next was Sonic Colors Ultimate, which again was a really shitty rushed out hack job thanks to Blind Squirrel Entertainment. I'm not gonna go deep here, I've already talked about Sonic Colors Ultimate far too much on this channel, but God, it's terrible. And the fact that it barely got patched at all post-release shows that the devs really didn't give a shit. If you do want to play Sonic Colors Ultimate and you want the best possible experience, I highly recommend checking out Project Re-Rainbow. Basically, this retools Sonic Colors Ultimate into an actual remaster and makes the game actually good. I prefer Project Re-Rainbow over the original Wii release now. I don't understand why this was so hard for Blind Squirrel to do. Following that, the next mainline game was Sonic Frontiers. Now, I do very much intend on making a standalone video for Sonic Frontiers. I actually always have. I have far too much to say about this game than would fit in this segment of the video, so I'm gonna keep it brief. Sonic Frontiers is at its best the open world Sonic game that I've always wanted, and at its worst, basically just Sonic Forces Part 2. Basically, it's an open-world Sonic game with cyberspace levels that are more reminiscent of a modern Sonic game. Some of these have level designs ripped straight out of Generations or the adventure games, and it's interesting to play them with the boost mechanic intact. But modern Sonic still doesn't control particularly well. I don't think it's as bad as in Sonic Forces. I do feel like I have a bit more freedom when it comes to turning, but it's still not great. Once again, momentum doesn't really seem to do anything for modern Sonic, and that's so sad. This franchise was built brick by brick based off of momentum-based fast-paced gameplay. But weirdly enough, he controls far differently in the open world, where he actually does have momentum to his moves. You can actually go through in the settings and fine-tune the controls, so Sonic controls exactly how you would like in the open world, which is fantastic. You can even unlock the spin dash, and it's broken as hell like it was in Sonic Adventure 1. In a word, Sonic Frontiers is good. I do think that there's a little too much holding it back to make it excellent or even great, but I'm looking forward to what the sequel has in store to spice up the formula and make it a little bit more interesting. The control in the cyberspace levels is certainly something I want to see addressed and fixed, and what worried me about Shadow Generations at first is I thought they were going to use this control as the basis for how Shadow controls in the game. I was very captivated from the first trailer though. It seemed pretty interesting that they wanted to make it basically a pseudo-sequel to Shadow the Hedgehog from 2005, but make it a little bit more refined and interesting with modern Sonic influence.
I still do think this is a far better game than Sonic Heroes, and I will shave my head before I admit that I'm wrong.
What?
So now that we've gotten all the preliminary stuff out of the way, let's talk about Sonic X Shadow Generations. I'm going to start with Sonic Generations since that's half the package. The game begins with a pudgier, younger Sonic running through Green Hill Zone when suddenly a sky butthole appears and snatches him up. Cut to some time later, and Sonic's friends are setting up a surprise birthday party for him. How old is Sonic turning? I don't know. I think Sonic's 15 canonically, so is this his 16th birthday, or is this taking place during his 14th birthday? Roger Craig Smith does not sound like a 15-year-old. But before we can process that, the sky butthole's back and captures all of Sonic's friends, forcing Sonic to run through Green Hill Zone himself. After rescuing Tails and the rest of Sonic's friends, Modern Sonic and Classic Sonic eventually team up to take down the worst final boss in Sonic the Hedgehog history, controlled by, you guessed it, Dr. Eggman. After punting it into next Tuesday, Modern Sonic says goodbye to Classic Sonic.
Hey Sonic! Enjoy your future! It's gonna be great!
It's gonna be great, just remember what we talked about. No kissing any humans, don't randomly turn into a werewolf, don't get sucked into any storybooks, don't wear any scarves or bandages, and if all that goes to plan, it's gonna be great. I'll see you in 6 years. And that is the entire plot of Sonic Generations. You may notice I summarized it in under a minute. That's because this story doesn't really have much of a story. You can tell the creators of this game wanted to take an approach of Sonic's greatest hits and couldn't really think of a creative way of shoehorning in a time travel plot that was super advanced, and let's be honest, the last time that happened, it wasn't that great. So they decided to take the easy route and not really write much of a story at all, which honestly I'm okay with. It is worth noting though that the cutscenes specifically in this re-release were actually rewritten. Sonic Team hired the Sonic comic veteran Ian Flynn to rework Sonic Generations' plot into something a little bit more bearable. The overall story is the exact same as the original release, so don't play this expecting it to be completely different, but the dialogue is certainly a lot less cringeworthy than it was in 2011. But playing a Sonic game for the dialogue is like saying you watch porn for the plot. Do you really? The major draw to Sonic Generations is the fact that the gameplay is rock solid. It was back then, and it still is to this day. Just like Sonic the Hedgehog 2 all the way back in the 90s, Sonic Generations is divided up into a two-act structure. In Act 1, you play as Classic Sonic, who is loosely emulating how he felt in the Genesis days. It doesn't feel exact, his jump is a little too high, his ground movement is a little too slippery, but it's close enough. Disappointingly, he doesn't have the Insta-Shield from Sonic the Hedgehog 3, nor does he have the Super Peel-Out from Sonic CD. Hi, unscripted post-production Danny here. I am totally wrong about that. Apparently the Insta-Shield is in this game. It's called the Twin Spin Attack, and unfortunately, just like the Drop Dash, it is a skill that you have to enable, so you cannot have that plus the homing attack at the same time. Not that that would really work. But yeah, I'm wrong. Apparently this is in the game. I just never hear anyone talk about it. For the remaster, Sonic Team added the Drop Dash as an equipable skill. Now both Modern Sonic and Classic Sonic can unlock additional skills by simply playing the game, doing challenges, or collecting red rings. I do find it strange that the Drop Dash is an equipable skill and not something just baked into Classic Sonic's moveset like how it was in Sonic Mania. Especially considering the fact that the Drop Dash is nowhere near as powerful as the Spin Dash is, so they could have safely kept it in as part of his permanent moveset, but I guess not. What bugs me out about this is the fact that Modern Sonic also can drop dash, and that is baked into his moveset. You can't de-equip this, and I don't understand why it's not the same story for Classic Sonic, but whatever. Speaking of Modern Sonic, he has all of his abilities from Sonic Colors and Sonic Unleashed. He can homing attack by double tapping the jump button when a reticle appears on an enemy, he can air dash when there's no enemy to lock onto, he can boost by pressing down either a face button or the trigger depending on what you have it mapped to, he can stomp by pressing the right face button in the air, he can drift around corners by pressing the opposite trigger to what you have the boost map to, he can light speed dash by pressing the top face button by default, and what's unique to Sonic Generations is that by jumping off of specially marked ramps or rings, you can perform tricks in midair to build up your boost gauge. Modern Sonic controls pretty damn well in general, but he doesn't feel as perfect as he did in the adventure games, or really as tight as he did in Sonic Unleashed. It's a little bit looser here, but unlike Sonic Forces and Sonic Frontier Cyberspace levels, the level design in Sonic Generations complements the looser control scheme. You can actually move around in these stages, and it feels like Sonic isn't actively fighting you when you're boosting. And as a result, you feel like you're in constant control of Sonic in this game, and that makes speedrunning it so much fun. And you gotta remember that speedrunning is the reason Sonic exists in the first place. Now the levels themselves are all recreations of levels from Sonic's history. In the original Genesis era, you have Green Hill Zone from Sonic the Hedgehog 1, Chemical Plant Zone, the Death Egg Robot, and a Casino Night Zone themed pinball Table, all from Sonic the Hedgehog 2, a rival battle against Metal Sonic from Sonic CD, and finally the Sky Sanctuary Zone from Sonic & Knuckles. In the next era, named the Dreamcast era, we have both Speed Highway and a Perfect Chaos boss fight from Sonic Adventure 1, a Shadow the Hedgehog boss battle along with City Escape from Sonic Adventure 2, and Seaside Hill from Sonic Heroes. In the hilariously outdated modern era, we have Crisis City and a Silver the Hedgehog boss battle from Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. Silver's boss battle feels absolutely nothing like how it did in the original game, thank fucking God! We have the Egg Dragoon and Rooftop Run from Sonic Unleashed, and finally Planet Wisp from Sonic Colors. Now, you may remember earlier in the video when I said one of my main issues with Sonic Generations was the final modern Sonic level. Yeah, Planet Wisp isn't great. It starts off promising enough, but as soon as you get to the factory, it turns into a fully 2D level. Now, back on the Wii with Sonic Colors, I could deal with that, because the levels were bite-sized, there were tons of Wisp power-ups, and before I knew it, I'd be back in 3D playing as normal modern Sonic again. But in Sonic Generations, half this game is already 2D, and I just played a classic Sonic version of Planet Wisp. Why would I want to spend the entirety of Planet Wisp in 2D as modern Sonic? Did they run out of time? And the thing that truly stopped this from breaking my top 3 Sonic games was the final boss, and spoiler alert, it's still terrible. This game does very little to remedy what is, in my opinion, the worst final boss in Sonic the Hedgehog history. Whether you're playing as modern or classic Sonic here, the controls are friggin' terrible. And Sonic's friends never shut their damn traps about homing shots. It's like this the entire goddamn time. It's obnoxious. And that's why I was so bummed out the original Sonic Generations never got official DLC, because ending the game just on this is like ending a fantastic Beethoven score with a wet fart. Well, thankfully in this day and age, we don't end the game on that note anymore because there's an entire other half of the game to play. But before we get there, I do have some other things to talk about with Sonic Generations. Like I mentioned earlier, the performance for the original PS3 and 360 versions wasn't too great. The frame rate tried to stay at around 30 FPS, but it would dip on occasion, which was a little unfortunate. Thankfully, the remaster does hang at a pretty solid 60 frames per second, but there are no performance options to raise that up to a possible 120, for example. This is very much the definition of a first world problem, but I am very used to modern games where the frame rate can match the refresh rate of the monitor you're playing it on. Supposedly, Shadow Generations can go up to 120 frames per second, so I was a little bummed out to find that Sonic Generations was locked to 60. Is it a deal breaker? No, but it's worth mentioning. The presentation was wonderful for the original Sonic Generations. As a matter of fact, it was so good, I remember seeing people debating whether or not this remaster was actually a remaster. Yeah, it still holds up that well. Even if this game wasn't remastered, it would still look phenomenal. Audio-wise, it's also fantastic. The sound effects are nice and punchy, and the music is kick-ass. Obviously, there's remixes of every single level that are presented in this game, but there's also some remix songs from Sonic Battle and the Saturn version of Sonic 3D Blast, which is more than welcome. I didn't think that soundtrack would ever even be acknowledged by Sega again. Cash Cash, a pretty popular DJ, remixed City Escape and Supersonic Racing for this game, and they also sound great. And it's always a pleasure hearing Open Your Heart by Crush 40 during the Perfect Chaos battle. I would have been genuinely upset if that wasn't included. I absolutely adore the Chow searching minigame that was included in the re-release. Now, I'm someone that never really stopped playing the original Sonic Generations, so over time I developed very specific particular ways of playing each level, and now having a game mode that challenges that and forces me to think outside of the box and search in areas I never would have looked to find the Chow really adds a lot of replay value to the game, and it teaches me new routes that even I didn't know about 13 years later. The challenge missions are basically the exact same as they were in the 2011 release. They range from fun to superfluous and kinda harmless. You can unlock the homing attack for Classic Sonic later on in the game, and it is fucking broken as shit. It's actually kind of fun to use in these levels. It makes it feel like a much better Sonic 4. I just wish I could combine this with the drop dash, but unfortunately the homing attack takes up all of the skill points, and that means you can't equip the drop dash.
Oh my god, Sega, please patch this game and add it to his main moveset. I'm getting so fucking tired of going to the skill shop and re-equipping it over and over again.
So as a whole, do I recommend Sonic Generations? Yeah, I do. Whether you're playing the original release from 2011, 7 or the remaster in this day and age, which comes with the extra game that we're going to get to in just a second, I think Sonic Generations is overall a very fun experience. If you're a fan of 90s mascot platformers, or even just platforming games in general, Sonic Generations is one of the best ones you can play. Even with the 3 issues I mentioned earlier, and the game running a little bit short, we at least have the remaster with Shadow's story to make up for that. And speaking of, I think it's high time we shift over to Shadow's story. Now, I haven't put up any spoiler warnings in this video because I don't intend on really spoiling much. I'm not going to go too in-depth with the story, nor am I going to show any of the final boss because this game is less than a month old at the time of recording. A lot of people are waiting for Christmas to play this game, and if you ordered from a specific outlet, you may still be waiting for your retail copy from October. Not mentioning any limited run names. I'm going to have to make a video about these guys at some point, aren't I? Another time. Shadow Generation starts with Shadow exploring the Space Colony Ark and stumbling across the fake emerald Tails developed back in Sonic Adventure 2. His day is then immediately ruined when the Time Eater shows up and, just like in Sonic Generations, forces him into a white void for Shadow to recount the events of his past. The main difference with Shadow Generations is that Eggman isn't the main antagonist, but instead they brought back Black Doom. Now, if you skipped over Shadow the Hedgehog from 2005, you're probably really fucking confused about who this guy is and what's going on. So I'll give you the TLDR. Back when Gerald Robotnik was developing Shadow the Hedgehog, he had a couple of failed prototypes beforehand, obviously the Bio-Lizard being one of them. At the end of his wits, Gerald Robotnik struck a deal with an alien by the name of Black Doom to inject Shadow with alien DNA, which basically means that Shadow is more alien than Hedgehog. Between the Time Eater messing with the space-time continuum and some DNA being left on the Space Colony Ark, Black Doom is ready to make his triumphant return and is ready to use Shadow the Hedgehog as the ultimate weapon. The ultimate weapon. Why did I make him sound like a Danganronpa character? As Black Doom is preparing to use Shadow as the ultimate weapon, he begins to learn new powers. Will Shadow be able to use these powers against Black Doom and turn the tables in his favor? You probably already know the answer to that, but like I said, my lips are sealed when it comes to spoilers because I know so many people are looking forward to playing this game. What was already spoiled for us were the levels. Now, just like Sonic Generations, each level references a level from Shadow's past, but there aren't nearly as many levels this time around because Shadow was kinda sorta in cryostasis for 50 years. From Sonic Adventure 2, we have Final Rush / Final Chase in the Bio-Lizard. From Sonic Heroes, we have Rail Canyon in the Metal Overlord boss battle. From Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, we have Kingdom Valley and a boss fight against Mephiles. From Sonic Forces, we have Sunset Heights. From Sonic Frontiers, we have Chaos Island, and the game finally ends on Radical Highway from Sonic Adventure 2. Radical Highway actually makes a couple cameo appearances throughout each of the levels. Now, there is a very vocal side of the fanbase that doesn't understand why Chaos Island is in this game because Shadow was never in Sonic Frontiers. But this vocal side of the fanbase also conveniently forgets that Crisis City shouldn't technically exist after the ending of Sonic 06. Additionally, Stardust Speedway probably shouldn't still be in its bad future, so I think it's pretty clear that the Time Eater can do some funky stuff with the space-time continuum. And honestly, to me, whether or not Shadow has canonically stepped foot on the Starfall Islands before or after the events of this game don't really matter to me so long as the game is fun. And good news, the game is pretty damn fun. As a matter of fact, I think I had more fun with Shadow Generations than I did with the Sonic Generations Remaster, which was not expected at all. As the sole playable character, Shadow the Hedgehog controls absolutely beautifully in Shadow Generations. He feels like he has actual weight to his movement, which is something the last couple of Sonic games were severely lacking. To me, Shadow controls far better in his game than modern Sonic did in Sonic Generations. Whether airborne or on the ground, I have so much control over Shadow's movement that it enables me to do all sorts of shortcuts and skips that I wouldn't be able to do playing as modern Sonic. And what aids in this is the fantastic level design. Now, the last couple of Sonic games have had bite-sized modern Sonic levels, so imagine my shock when these average to be between 3.5 and 5 minutes long, even when you're going as fast as possible. And if you're worried about the pacing screeching to a halt when the game decides, hey, it's time for 2D, well, I have some fantastic news. Every single Act 1 level of Shadow Generations is in full 3D. There are no 2D segments whatsoever in any Act 1 level of Shadow Generations. Now, the majority of the Act 2 levels take on a 2D perspective, more like a 2.5D, but not even all of these are fully 2.5D. The final level in Radical Highway is also in full 3D. That's so cool. What happened at Sonic Team? They're not supposed to be making good decisions like this. And it doesn't even stop there because Shadow's abilities don't detract at all from the game, but instead add to it. Like I mentioned earlier, Shadow develops superpowers throughout the game named Doom Powers. These range from being able to launch a more defined Chaos Spear, to being able to launch a flurry of kicks and punches at enemies and pretty much stop time still, being able to surf on water, morph into pink goo, and soar through the air with wings. This is the coolest fucking thing I've ever seen. There isn't a single Doom power that I don't look forward to using. The game doesn't do a great job explaining how Doom Morph works, so at first I had no idea what the hell I was doing and I didn't like it at all. But now that I know how it works, I genuinely look forward to using it in every opportunity I have. It's so much fun. The Doom Wings are basically Shadow's version of Supersonic. It allows him to fly through the air at the expense of a couple rings per second. Now, as anyone that's played Sonic Adventure 2 could tell you, Shadow does have a canonical super form, but Sonic did need the Chaos Emeralds in Sonic Generations, meaning that they did have to figure out their own sort of thing. Honestly, I prefer the Doom Wings to Supersonic. They're so much fun to use and glide around. And while I'm not diving too deep into the story, the ending is really touching and adds a bit of a full circle closure to Shadow's character. I really do like it. I have one complaint about Shadow Generations, and while it's not the biggest deal in the world, it is something that I did find to be a bit annoying. As with Sonic Generations, there are a handful of challenge levels for each mainline level in the game. Now in Sonic Generations, you only had to play one challenge per level per era, but in Shadow Generations, you have to play all 4 per level. Add that to Acts 1 and 2, and you're going to be playing 6 levels that either look virtually identical or are close enough to the point where the visuals do start to get stale after a while. Now, I'm the guy that went through and S-ranked every single challenge level in Sonic Generations, so I certainly don't mind the extra gameplay here, but making it mandatory when some of these challenges aren't designed the best, I don't feel was a step in the right direction. Especially the gondola level on Chaos Island. Oh my god, this took so many attempts. I don't even think I S-ranked this thing. Perhaps for a sequel, maybe have 2 challenge missions per level be mandatory, just so that way it doesn't exhaust the player of seeing the exact same level over and over again. But it also gives completionists the option to play through the levels anyway. I would have done so regardless. I'm a Sonic fan. Of course I'm going to want to get the absolute maximum out of my Sonic game, but making them absolutely mandatory, especially right after playing the main acts, was not the way to go in my opinion. But that's literally the only complaint I have against Shadow Generations. This game is about as flawless as a modern Sonic game can get, and I cannot believe I'm saying that after playing Sonic Forces and Sonic Colors Ultimate. To call this game a pleasant surprise would be the understatement of the century, because the value here is off the charts. You're getting one of the best modern Sonic games in years, and on top of that, you're getting a Shadow the Hedgehog game that's arguably even better. And we're not even done yet, because we have a DLC level based off of the 3rd Sonic movie coming this December. For the first time in a long time, I am incredibly proud to be a Sonic the Hedgehog fan. The quality of this remaster is overwhelming, and it is definitely worth its price tag, whether you buy the digital deluxe copy that costs a few bucks extra or not. The extra DLC skins are also kinda cute too. Shadow Generations itself, while it does run a bit short, as a continuation of the main Sonic Generations game, completely fixes 2 of the 3 major issues I had with Sonic Generations as a whole. And this complete package, this might be my new favorite Sonic game. I'm dead serious. There's so much content here and there's so much to love. I think this is going to be the Sonic game that I come back to time and time again over the next decade, like I have with Sonic Generations. And that's definitely worth more than the $50 price tag that they're asking for this game.
Well, that was a pretty long video. Let's see how I did. A D rank. I mean, I wasn't exactly expecting an S, but I couldn't even get a C. Why did you give me a D? I blame you.